Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 289, Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana is almost here. It goes down on June 10th, and I absolutely hate UFC 289. And in this video, it's going to be the top 3 reasons I hate UFC 289. I'm going to go from 3 to 1, 1 being the reason I most hate UFC 289, and it actually infuriates me. This number 1 reason drives me up a wall, and the UFC does this quite often. But I usually do this for every single pay-per-view card, no matter how good it is. But in this particular case, this video is just perfect because UFC 289 is so abhorrent. UFC 289 is so terrible. I could sit here and just name off pejoratives to describe UFC 289 for the next 30 minutes because it's just so bad, and I hate this card. We're going to do some honorable mentions, but honestly, I could do a top 10 list. I could do a top 20 list. UFC 289 leaves a lot to be desired. With that being said, I will also be doing a video in the next couple days, the top 3 reasons I love UFC 289. I will also be doing a video grading UFC 289 on a scale from 1 to 10, and I'll also be doing a bunch of UFC 289 prediction videos. So if you want to watch any of those videos, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, like this video, I would greatly appreciate it. Starting off with the honorable mentions, because honestly, I could just go with the whole card. This is $85? This card is $85? That's crazy to me. The UFC just keeps raising the price and raising the price. And I know we get some of these pay-per-views like UFC 287, which was stacked like crazy. And I know there's some give and take there. But forking out $85 for this card is just, it actually hurts my soul, to be quite honest. $85 for UFC 289, Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana. That's a kick in the gut, honestly. That's just, I can't even, it's a couple weeks away. Honestly, if I didn't have the channel, I'd probably go out somewhere and watch it. But I've ordered every single pay-per-view since like 2017, 2018. I've been ordering the majority of pay-per-views since like 2013, 2012. So I'm going to order this pay-per-view. It's got some good fights on it, but this entire card just, I don't know what Dana White and the UFC is thinking. And imagine, what's crazy to me is the co-main event of this card, which is Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush, wasn't even originally on this card. So that's crazy to me. $85 price point. I think that's unacceptable for a card like this. I know the UFC doesn't change their prices based on the quality of the card, but for me, that's too much. Second honorable mention before we get to the list, why is Chris Curtis versus Nasruddin Imavov on the prelims? I'm not going to get into it too much because we're kind of going to touch on this later in the video. But Chris Curtis, Nasruddin Imavov, 2 top 15 middleweights. That could be like a main event, co-main event of a fight night card. And then you have a card of UFC 289, which lacks quality in terms of the pay-per-view portion. Why are you putting that on the prelims? That is crazy to me. That's a great fight. That's a great matchup. I'm really looking forward to it. I know someone's going to say, oh, you're biased because you're friends with Chris Curtis. Chris Curtis doesn't pay me a dime, okay? He doesn't send me any checks, and if he does, I haven't been getting them. I just think that fight, that's a great fight. It's buried on the prelims. That's just terrible. I don't know what the UFC's thinking with UFC 289. Before I get into my actual list, comment down below, what are some reasons you hate UFC 289? I usually ask that in the beginning. I forgot to ask it. I got into my honorable mentions. I got ahead of myself because I just hate this card with a burning passion. And maybe hate is too strong of a word. I know some people like to say that. You could say just strongly dislike. And again, I'm still going to watch the card. But I just feel like there's so many mistakes being made with this card. And I started this video series for every single pay-per-view back at UFC 279. That's the card that inspired this. And there really hasn't been a card that has been like, okay, this is perfect for this video up until UFC 289. So starting off with the number 3 reason I hate UFC 289, it could be the end of Charles Oliveira. And I know that sounds crazy. I know that sounds premature. But Oliveira, for years, everyone was saying, oh, he takes so much damage. He gets hurt so often. And he lost his title to Islam Makhachev. I know technically he lost in the Justin Gaethje fight because he was stripped because he came in overweight. But he got hurt badly by Islam Makhachev on the feet, got dropped, and got submitted. Beniel Dariush is a surging contender. He arguably already deserves a lightweight title fight. There's no guarantee Charles Oliveira beats Beniel Dariush. He's a good fighter, has a great, well-rounded skill set. And Beniel hits hard as well. Beniel's great on the feet as well. Look what he did to Jakar Close. Brutally KO'd him. And I'm just worried, when I see guys fight in and fight out get hurt and get rocked. And in his last fight, getting rocked and then getting finished. Beniel Dariush may very well put Charles Oliveira out and finish him, go on his way to a lightweight title shot, and that may be the very end of Charles Oliveira. And Charles Oliveira is one of my favorite fighters. If Charles Oliveira gets brutally finished at UFC 289, for me that will be the equivalent of Tony Ferguson getting his head punted in by Michael Chandler. That'll be the equivalent for me because it was really tough to see that, and I want to see Charles Oliveira succeed. I want to see him get back to a title shot. But the Beniel Dariush fight, while I love it, and while Oliveira would only be on a 2-fight losing streak, it's just like you're on the top until you're not. Kamaru Usman, think about the perception of Kamaru Usman going into round 5 less than a year ago. And think about the perception of Kamaru Usman today. Got flatline KO'd in the 5th round. And that didn't happen to Oliveira, but you get my point. Then lost a close decision to Leon Edwards. And now look at everyone's writing him off. He's old. He's, washed. His chin is gone. And not to say that's necessarily true, but we've seen it happen time and time again. You lose one time, and the next thing you know, you're on the downslope. And I know Oliveira's lost plenty of times before. And I do love this matchup. I am just absolutely terrified that Beniel Dariush goes out there and puts Charles Oliveira to sleep. And then he just goes on that skid, that Cody Garbrandt type skid, that Marlon Moraes type skid. My favorite fighters, I always get nervous about those skids. And Charles Oliveira is one of my favorite fighters to watch. And to see him go on the decline when I've believed in him for so long, I've never picked against him on the channel, it would really hurt badly. And that's why I had to incorporate it in this list. Moving on to the number 2 reason I hate UFC 289. And that is because the UFC put together a shit pay-per-view card for the Canadian fans. And I know people are saying, well, why do you care? Why do you care? They haven't been back there since 2019. And when they were last there, it wasn't the greatest card ever. It was a good main event. It was Justin Gaethje versus, I think, Cowboy Cerrone last time they were there. But Dana White and the UFC is hyping up this big return to Canada. And this is what they bring back. And I know there's probably some Canadian fans watching this video. Let me know down in the comments if I'm right. To bring this type of card back after being gone for so long, that's crazy. In my opinion, the Canadian fans are known for being rabid MMA fans. This is like the equivalent, like you go away to war for like 2 years and you come back and your wife is pregnant. That's essentially what this is here. The Canadian fans have been so excited and then they get this card, You've been gone for 2 years. Well, how is she pregnant? You get my point? This is just to put this type of card together for the Canadian fans, and this main event in particular. Amanda Nunes, Irene Aldana. I guess it's better than the original main event, which was Amanda Nunes versus Juliana Pena 3, which was a real slap in the face. I guess it's better than that, and then at least you got the co-main event, Charles Oliveira, Beniel Dariush, which is really the real people's main event. But I just think it's disgusting. The Canadian fans have been big-time supporters of MMA, and in the era that I started watching when GSP was this massive star, and they were going there with these huge arena shows and stacking the cards and having GSP main event against like Nick Diaz and Jake Shields back in the day, and they got these great cards and these big pay-per-views, and now they've been gone for 3 years. Instead of returning with a bang, they say, hey, look, we've been gone for 4 years, but we're coming back with Amanda Nunes and Irene Aldana, and then we're not even going to make the card that stacked. I just think the UFC is really dropping the ball here because the Canadian fans are huge MMA fans. And again, this is not something that necessarily is going to bother me all that much, but I just feel sorry for them. I'd be pissed, if after being gone for so long, if they return to my hometown and I'm like, damn, I don't even want to go to the card because look at this main event. I just feel like it should have been one of those fight cards that the UFC really said, you know what, we gotta show out for this one. Look what they did for UFC 290. Look what they did for UFC 291. They could have kind of took some of that from there and put it on UFC 289 and made it much more substantial And think about it. Originally, Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush was on 288. Conspiracy theory, was Oliveira even injured? Because imagine if that fight wasn't on this card. I would be throwing up at this point, you know? And imagine trying to go there live when they're charging all this money for these tickets. So I feel horrible for the Canadian fans. Moving on to my number one reason I hate UFC 289. And this is something the UFC does quite often. And that is a horrible card structure. You look at the main card, Amanda Nunes, Irene Aldana, co-main event, Charles Oliveira, Beniel Dariush, featured fight on the card, Mike Mallet versus Adam Fugit. Going down the card, Dan Ige, Nate Landwehr. Going down the card, Marc-Andre Barriault versus Eric Anders. That doesn't sound like a horrible main card, but then you start looking at the prelims. Well, wait a second. Matt Schnell versus David Dvorak on the prelims? Khalil Roundtree versus Chris No Chin Dawkins on the prelims? Nasruddin Imavov versus Chris Curtis on the prelims? And I understand why they did this. Marc-Andre Barriault is from Canada, and then you have Mike Mallet from Canada. But for me, this is like, this structure is just horrible. I feel like, you know, the Dan Ige, Nate Landwehr fight's probably where it belongs, but that even should just probably open up the main card, in my opinion. And then you should probably have at least one of the prelims fights that I mentioned, one of the top 3 prelim fights, probably Nasruddin Imavov versus Chris Curtis on the main card, and then put one of these, you know, Canadian fighters down on the prelims, like Marc-Andre Barriault versus Eric Anders. Put that on the prelims. Because this card structure is all over the place. Like, I feel like we're watching prelims during the main card. It just doesn't make sense. It just all seems out of order. And I know sometimes they'll take one fight that really should be on the main card and put it as the headliner of the prelims because they want people to tune in and watch the prelims. But in this case, it just seems like the order is completely off. The entire prelims should be on the main card, and then half the main card should be on the prelims, and then you just have a terrible main event, a not great main event. It's not the worst main event ever, but it's not good. It's not any. I don't think there's anyone like going to sleep tonight and saying, "Oh, how many more sleeps till we get to see Nunes versus Aldana? Can't wait for that fight." This card is just completely dysfunctional. This card is completely disappointing, and I don't know why they're building it this way outside of the Canadian bias. The Canadians, I guess, want to see their fighters on the main card, but even so, they should show up for the prelims. I'm sure they would. To build it this way is like, I don't even know. It's like getting your appetizer. I'm making a bunch of comparisons, but it's like getting your appetizer after your main course. That's the way I feel. Mike Mallet, Adam Fugit, featured fight on the main card. What? What is that? What is going on there? Just for comparison, UFC 285 off the top of my head, feature fight on the main card, Jeff Neal versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. Think about that. Mike Mallet, Adam Fugit, is that on the same planet? I don't think so. So the card structure for this fight card is terrible. The bare minimum, one of the Canadians should be off the main card, and they should sub in either Matt Schnell versus David Dvorak or Nasruddin Imavov versus Chris Curtis, and then throw one of the Canadian fighters down on the prelims, and that would make the card much better. And I know people are going to say, you're watching all the fights anyway, what does it matter? It just doesn't feel right. It feels like something is off here. The card structure, when I saw this, when they originally announced the card structure of UFC 289, I was like, what is going on here? Like, what's next? They're going to put Charles Oliveira, Beniel Dariush on the prelims? Because then nobody's buying this card. Because I'm telling you, I'd say half of the fans that are going to buy UFC 289 are buying it for Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush. That is the people's main event. But yeah, I'm just not a big fan of UFC 289. I'm not looking forward to UFC 289 outside of the co-main event, really. It's a solid fight night card. It's a solid fight night card. I know that sounds crazy, but the way they structured it, it just doesn't make any sense. And I hate UFC 289, guys. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I'm looking forward to Charles Oliveira versus Beniel Dariush. Also, this video is designed to be negative towards the card. I'm going to make another video, the top 3 reasons I love UFC 289. So don't get too crazy down in the comments saying, oh, if you don't want to watch it, don't watch it. I'm going to watch it. But when we've been watching cards like UFC 285 and UFC 287, UFC 289 leaves a lot to be desired. And honestly, I could have thrown the main event on the list as well because I'm not particularly pumped for Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana. I'm happy that it's not the Pena trilogy, but I'm not really looking forward to this main event at all. That could have been on the list as well. There could have been plenty of other reasons. Mike Mallet versus Adam Fugit on the featured fight on the main card could have been a reason in its own. But they're my top 3 reasons that I hate UFC 289. Let me know what you guys think about it down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.